After the slaughter, Earth sent one signal. Diplomacy is over. Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck of New Haven City, watching the twin suns set over the purple mountains of Verdun 7. And she smiled at her daughter, who was tugging at her sleeve with excitement. "Mama, can we go to the festival tonight?" Little May asked, her eyes bright with hope. And Sarah nodded, because how could she say no to that face? This was humanity's dream made real. A world far from Earth, where over 1 million people had built homes and schools and hospitals and parks where children played without fear. And Sarah felt proud to be part of it 30 years ago. Humanity had reached the stars and discovered they were not alone. For the galaxy was filled with ancient species who had been traveling between worlds for thousands of years. And these elder races had formed something called the Galactic Concordance, a massive alliance of 12 species who controlled most of known space. The Concordance had welcomed humanity with polite words and careful smiles, though Sarah always sensed something cold beneath their kindness, something that looked at humans the way a person might look at insects crawling across a kitchen floor. But humanity had been patient and peaceful and eager to learn. And colonies like Verdun 7 had grown under the watchful eyes of alien diplomats, who measured every human achievement with quiet calculation. Commander James Walker sat in the colony's defense center that evening, running routine checks on the sensor grid, his coffee growing cold beside him as he watched data scroll across his screens. "Quiet night," his lieutenant Maria Santos remarked, leaning back in her chair with a yawn. "Too quiet," Walker replied, though he laughed at himself for sounding paranoid, because Verdun 7 had never seen trouble in all its years of existence, and why would tonight be any different? The answer came from the darkness between stars. High War Master Kethfrol of the Dralith hegemony stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Endless Judgment, watching the blue and green world grow larger in the viewscreen before him. And he felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The Dralith were the military arm of the Concordance, tall and scaled and ancient. And they had argued for decades that humanity was a threat that needed to be controlled before it grew too strong. These humans breathed like vermin and spread across space like a disease. Kethfrol had told the Concordance Council just months before, and if we do not stop them now, they will consume everything. The council had listened and debated and ultimately done nothing, because that was what councils did. But Kethfrol had received quiet approval from enough powerful voices to take matters into his own hands. No ground forces. He commanded his fleet. No negotiations, no survivors, for this is not a battle but a lesson. And the lesson must be absolute. 300 warships dropped from hyperspace above Verdun 7. And Commander Walker had exactly 4 seconds to feel his blood turn to ice before the first volley struck. The shields around New Haven City lasted 12 minutes, which was 11 minutes longer than anyone expected. And in those 12 minutes, Sarah Chung grabbed her daughter and ran through streets filled with screaming people while the sky turned to fire above them. "Mama, what is happening?" May cried, and Sarah had no answer because there was no answer that made sense. No reason that justified the hell raining down upon them. Walker broadcast distress calls on every frequency, begging for help from Earth, from the Concordance, from anyone who might hear. But space was vast and help was far away. And the Dralith jamming systems swallowed his words like stones dropped into an endless ocean. The bombardment continued for 6 hours, 6 hours of fire and death and destruction so complete that nothing remained but glass and ash and silence. And when it was finished, Kethfrol ordered his ships to record everything. Every burning city, every shattered dream, every life erased from existence. "Send this to Earth," he commanded, "and include our message." The message was simple. Know your place on Earth. It was morning when the transmission arrived, and President Elena Vasquez was drinking coffee in her office when her aide burst through the door with a face pale as death. "Madam President, you need to see this," he whispered, and his hands were shaking as he activated the wall screen. Elena watched the footage in silence, her coffee growing cold just as Walker's had. And she saw cities burn and people die and a world turn to nothing. And something inside her went very quiet and very still. "How many?" she asked, her voice steady despite the horror in her eyes. 1,200,043 confirmed colonists, her aide replied, including 80,000 children. Elena closed her eyes for just a moment. And when she opened them again, something had changed in their depths. Something old and dark and patient. "Get me every world leader on secure channels," she ordered, "and wake up the generals, all of them. And tell them to bring the files." "Which files, Madam President?" "They will know which files within an hour." Every major nation on Earth was connected. Faces grim on screens arranged around the Situation Room. And Elena showed them all what the Dralith had done. What the Concordants had allowed to happen while their diplomats smiled and spoke of peace. For 30 years. "We played their game," she said, her voice cutting through the shocked silence. "And we followed their rules and trusted their laws and believed that civilization meant something in this galaxy. But we were wrong, and now over 1 million of our people are dead because we dared to grow without permission." The leaders listened, and some wept and some raged, but all of them reached the same conclusion in the hours that followed. For humanity had always been fractured by borders and beliefs. Yet nothing united them faster than a common enemy and a wound that cut to the bone. "What do we do now?" the Chinese premier asked, his voice heavy with grief and anger. Elena looked at each face in turn. Leaders who had been rivals just hours before, who had argued over trade deals and territory and 1,000 petty concerns that seemed so small now. "Now we show them who we really are." The order went out to every human vessel, every station, every colony. "Go silent. Say nothing, do nothing. Wait for 3 days." Earth sent no messages and answered no calls. And the Concordants watched with growing unease as humanity retreated into itself like a wounded animal crawling into darkness. Ambassador Vethril of the Concordants tried 17 times to reach Earth, to offer condolences, to gauge the human response. But he received only silence in return, and that silence frightened him more than any threat could have. On the 4th day, humanity finally spoke. A single transmission burst from Earth, broadcast on every frequency, in every language known to the galaxy. And it reached every ship and station and world within range. A message that would echo through history: diplomacy is over. 3 words. Nothing more, but those 3 words carried the weight of 1 million souls. And the galaxy heard them and trembled, because the humans were no longer asking for justice. They were coming to take it, and nothing in the universe would stop them. After the slaughter, Earth sent one signal: diplomacy is over. Ambassador Vethril had studied humans for 40 years, watching them from the safety of diplomatic halls and observation reports. And he had written 17 papers about their psychology, their weaknesses, their foolish divisions that made them so easy to manipulate. He had called them emotional and short-lived and fractured by petty rivalries. And he had assured the Concordance Council that humanity would never be a threat because they spent more time fighting each other than reaching for the stars. He had been terribly wrong. The intelligence reports began flooding in just hours after Earth's message, and Vethril read each one with growing disbelief as everything he thought he knew about humanity crumbled to dust before his eyes. "This is impossible," he whispered to his aide, a young Concordance officer who looked equally disturbed by what they were. Seeing nations that had been enemies for centuries were shaking hands and signing treaties. Borders that had stood for generations were dissolving overnight. and military forces that had pointed weapons at each other just days ago were now merging into a single unified command. They united in 72 hours, his aide said, voice trembling. Our political scientists calculated it would take them another 300 years to achieve this level of cooperation. Vethril stared at the data and felt something he had not experienced in decades. Fear in Earth. General Helena Vance stood before the newly formed Terran War Council. Her silver hair pulled back tight, her eyes cold as the void between stars. And she looked at the assembled leaders with an expression that promised nothing but absolute commitment. For 30 years. We showed the galaxy our peaceful face, she said, her voice carrying through the vast chamber. We smiled and traded and followed their rules and let them believe we were soft. But that was never the truth. She pressed a button, and the screens around the room flickered to life with schematics and blueprints and technical specifications that made even the veteran admirals go pale. Project Sleeping Giant, she continued. Initiated in secret during the first year of contact, maintained and updated every year since. Because we always knew this day might come. Admiral Chun Wei, no relation to the Sarah Chun who had died on Verdun 7, leaned forward with wide eyes as he studied the designs. These weapons, he breathed. We sealed these programs after the last war. We called them too terrible for civilized use. The Dralith just murdered 1,200,000 of our people to send a message. Vance replied, her voice like ice. I think we can agree that civilization is no longer a concern. Deep beneath the mountains of Switzerland, doors that had not opened in 70 years groaned and swung wide, revealing factories that the public had been told were decommissioned decades ago deep beneath the oceans of Earth. Shipyards that appeared on no official map stirred to life, their automated systems waking from long slumber to begin the work. They had always been designed for deep, beneath the deserts of a dozen nations. Vaults filled with weapons too terrible to name began releasing their contents to waiting hands. Humanity had not been idle during its 30 years among the stars. And humanity had not been honest about its capabilities. Because the first rule of survival was never let your enemy know your true strength until the moment you used it. Director Yuki Tanaka of the United Earth Research Division stood in a laboratory filled with prototypes that would have made the Concordance weep with envy. And she addressed her team of scientists with fire in her eyes. They think we are primitives, she said. They think we spent these decades learning from them, copying their technology like children copying their parents. But they never asked what we were really doing in our spare time. She pulled up a hologram of a drive system that bent space in ways the elder races had never imagined. They never wondered why we always seemed slightly behind them, always struggling to catch up, and they never considered that we might be hiding our best work, waiting for the day we would need it. High War Master Kethrol received the first reports from his spies on Earth with dismissive confidence, certain that the humans were simply putting on a show of unity that would collapse within weeks. But as the reports continued, his confidence began to crack. They are not arguing, his intelligence officer reported, confusion clear in his voice. They are not demanding concessions or fighting over leadership or doing any of the things our models predicted. They are simply working together with perfect coordination, as if the attack awakened something in them that was sleeping. Impossible, Kethrol snapped. They are humans. They cannot maintain unity for more than a few moments before their nature takes over. War Master, his officer replied carefully. I believe their nature has taken over. I believe we simply misunderstood what that nature truly was. President Vasquez addressed the United Earth in a broadcast that reached every screen and speaker on the planet. Her face calm but her words burning with cold determination. The Dralith hegemony believes they taught us a lesson, she said. They believe they showed us our place in their galaxy, but they have made a terrible mistake. because the lesson they taught us was not the lesson they intended. She paused, and billions of humans leaned forward to listen. They reminded us who we are. They reminded us that we are not soft, we are not weak. We are not the peaceful species we pretended to be. We are the children of warriors and survivors, of people who crawled through mud and blood and fire to build civilizations from nothing. We came to the stars with open hands because we wanted to be better than our history. We wanted to believe that the universe rewarded kindness. But the Dralith have shown us the truth. Her eyes seem to look into the soul of every person watching. The universe respects only one thing: strength. And we have been hiding our strength for far too long. In the Concordance Council chambers, nervous whispers spread among the elder races as they watched the transformation of humanity with mounting horror. We should intervene, one ambassador suggested. We should reach out and offer mediation before this goes too far. And say what? Another replied. We stood by while the Dralith slaughtered over 1 million innocents. We did nothing while children burned. Do you think the humans will trust our mediation now? Ambassador Vethril sat in silence, remembering all his papers and all his predictions and all his confidence in understanding the human species. And he finally spoke the words that no one wanted to hear. We did not attack a peaceful species, he said quietly. We did not teach a lesson to primitives too foolish to know their place. We poked a predator that was pretending to be prey. And now that predator is awake, the council fell silent. And in that silence, they could almost hear the rumble of human factories, the hum of human weapons, the beat of human hearts united by grief and fury. The sleeping giant was rising. And the galaxy would never be the same. General Vance stood alone in her office after the meeting, looking at a photograph of her daughter who served on a ship near the border. And she whispered words meant for no one but herself. They wanted to see what humans become when you take everything from them. And now they will learn that we do not forget, we do not forgive, and we do not stop until the debt is paid. She set down the photograph and walked out to begin the work of war. After the slaughter, Earth sent one signal. Diplomacy is over. High War Master Kethril positioned his Grand Armada at the Kethris Corridor, a narrow passage through a dense nebula that served as the only known route from human space to Dralith territory. And he waited with absolute confidence for the pathetic human counterattack. They will come through here, he told his captains, because they have no other choice, and when they do, we will crush them so completely that the galaxy will forget they ever existed. 350 warships hung in the darkness like predators waiting at a watering hole. Their weapons primed, their crews eager, their sensors scanning every inch of space for any sign of human movement. They waited for 1 week, then 2, then a month. And still no human ships appeared. Perhaps they are too afraid to attack, one captain suggested during the 3rd month. And nervous laughter rippled through the command staff. Perhaps, another added, they are building defenses, accepting that they cannot win, preparing to hide behind walls like the cowards they are. Kethril said nothing, but a cold feeling had settled in his stomach that would not go away because the silence felt wrong. Felt like the pause before a storm rather than the quiet of surrender. He sent scout ships into human space to gather intelligence, fast vessels crewed by his best pilots, and he waited for their reports. None of them came back 6 months after the massacre of Varden 7. Admiral Draven Kowalski stood on the bridge of the battleship Vengeance and looked at the swirling radiation storm known as the Hollow, a region of space so deadly that no species had ever attempted to cross it. The concordance maps say this passage is impossible, his navigation officer reported. The radiation would cook any ship within hours. The gravity wells would tear us apart, and even if we survived both, the sensor interference would leave us flying blind. Kowalski smiled. And there was nothing warm in that smile. The concordance maps are based on their technology. he replied. "And their technology is 30 years out of date. The first Terran expeditionary force consisted of 57 warships, each one equipped with shielding systems that the galaxy had never seen, drive engines that bent space in ways the elder races thought impossible, and weapons that had been refined in secret for 3 decades. They entered the hollow, and the radiation screamed against their shields, and the gravity wells pulled at their hulls, and the interference blinded their sensors, but they pushed forward anyway, because humans had always been willing to walk through hell to reach their enemies. 3 weeks later, they emerged on the other side, in the heart of Drillith space, in a region so far from the Kethris corridor that no one was watching. All ships. Execute attack pattern Veridan, Kowalski commanded, and his fleet scattered like wolves into the night. The first Drallith world to fall was Kethver Prime, a military shipyard that produced a quarter of the hegemony's warships. And the attack came so fast and so brutal that the defense fleet had no time to even raise shields. Human ships appeared from nowhere, their weapons firing before they fully dropped from hyperspace. And within 30 minutes, the shipyard was debris, and the defense fleet was ash, and the humans were gone, vanished back into the darkness between stars. The second world fell 6 hours later, then the third, then the fourth, and by the end of the first day, 17 Drallith installations had been reduced to rubble. Kethrol received the reports in waves of increasing horror, each message bringing news of another world gone dark, another fleet destroyed, another piece of his military machine torn away. How? He roared at his intelligence officers. How did they get past our blockade? How did they appear in the heart of our space without any warning? No one had answers, because no one had ever considered that humans might do the impossible. Admiral Kowalski watched the burning remains of Abad the Marting Drallith command station drift past his view screen, and he felt nothing but cold satisfaction as he read the casualty reports. Civilian populations? He asked his tactical officer. Untouched, she replied. We hit only military targets. Exactly as ordered. Kowalski nodded, because this was important. Because the humans were not monsters despite what the Drallith had done. And the orders from Earth had been clear. Match what they gave Veridan. Nothing more, nothing less. Military installations, command centers, weapons factories, shipyards. Anything that helped the hegemony make war. All of these were valid targets. But cities full of civilians would be left alone, because humanity refused to become what they were fighting against. Leave the message, Kowalski ordered. And as his ships prepared to jump away, drones descended to the ruins and painted words in the ashes. 1,200,000. We are just getting started. The Concordance Council watched the unfolding disaster with mounting terror. Their screens filled with reports of Drallith defeats and human victories that defied all military logic. They are everywhere, Ambassador Vethrol whispered. They strike without warning and vanish before response fleets can arrive. They know exactly where to hit and exactly when to disappear. It is as if they can see our every move. They could, of course, because human intelligence operatives had spent 30 years mapping Drallith space, learning patrol routes, identifying weaknesses, building a picture so complete that Kowalski's fleet moved through enemy territory like ghosts through an empty house. General Vance watched the reports from Earth with grim satisfaction, tracking each successful strike, noting each Drallith loss. And she spoke to the War Council with the first hint of hope they have felt since Veridan burned. The hegemony is bleeding, she said. Their shipyards are ash, their supply lines are cut. Their command structure is in chaos, and they still do not know how we are reaching them. How long until they figure it out? President Vasquez asked. It does not matter, Vance replied. By the time they understand what we are doing, we will have already won. Because this war was never about conquering territory or capturing prisoners. She pulled up a map showing the path of destruction the human fleet had carved through Dralis space. This war is about sending a message. The same kind of message they sent when they burned Veridan. And our message is simple. Nowhere is safe. No one is beyond our reach. And we will not stop until the scales are balanced. Kethral stood alone in his command center, surrounded by screens showing the death of everything he had built. And for the first time in his long life, he understood what it felt like to be hunted. They are not fighting a war, he said to the empty room. They are conducting an execution, and I am the one on trial. He thought of Veridan 7, of the order he had given so casually, of the million lives he had erased to teach a lesson. And he finally realized the terrible truth. The lesson had been learned, but not by the ones he had intended to teach. The humans had learned exactly what they were capable of when they stopped being civilized. And now they were showing the galaxy what happened when you awakened the monster that humanity had worked so hard to keep sleeping, and the monster was hungry. After the slaughter, Earth sent one signal. Diplomacy is over. Panic spread through the galactic concordance like fire through dry grass, consuming the careful political structures that had taken thousands of years to build, and leaving nothing but fear and chaos in its wake. The Dralith demanded action from their allies, screening for a unified military response against the human threat. But the other 11 species of the concordance found themselves paralyzed by a terrible realization. They had watched the massacre of Veridan 7 in silence. They had done nothing while over 1 million innocents burned. And now humanity's ghost fleets were carving through Dralis space like knives through paper. And every elder race asked themselves the same haunting question. Are we next? Ambassador Vethro walked the corridors of the Concordance station with heavy steps, passing colleagues who refused to meet his eyes, passing diplomats who whispered behind his back, passing guards who watched him with something that looked almost like pity. He had spent 40 years building relationships with human representatives, earning their trust, learning their ways. And all that time, he had been reporting back to the council, helping them understand how to control the upstart species before it became a problem. Now those years of work had become a curse, because everyone knew that Vethro had assured the council that humanity would never be a threat, that the Veridan strike would break their spirit and send them crawling back to their home world. He had been so certain, so confident in his understanding of the human mind. And he had been catastrophically wrong. The emergency council session lasted for 3 days, filled with shouting and accusations and desperate pleas for solutions that no one could provide. We must unite against this human aggression. The Dralith High Speaker thundered, slamming his fist against the podium. They attack without provocation. They destroy without mercy. They are a plague that must be stopped. Without provocation? The Valari ambassador replied, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. You murdered over 1 million of their people, including 80,000 children, and you call their response unprovoked? The chamber erupted in chaos, accusations flying between species that had been allies for centuries. Old grudges surfacing as the fear of human retaliation stripped away the thin veneer of civilization one by one. The member species began to calculate their positions, weighing the risk of human anger against the cost of abandoning their Dralith allies. And the mathematics were not favorable within a week. 8 species had formally withdrawn from the Concordance, issuing public statements condemning the Veridan massacre and declaring their neutrality in the conflict between humanity and the hegemony. The 4 remaining species, those who had openly supported the strike or provided intelligence that made it possible, found themselves alone and afraid. General Vance received the news of the Concordance collapse with a thin smile, recognizing it for what it was, a desperate attempt to avoid the consequences that were coming whether they admitted guilt or not. The rats are fleeing the ship, she remarked to President Vasquez. but some of them helped light the fire, and we have very good records of who did what. Should we pursue them? Vasquez asked. Not yet, Vance replied. First, we finish with the ones who cannot hide. Then we discuss what justice looks like for those who stood by and watched. Ambassador Vethrol made one final attempt at peace, arranging a meeting with General Vance aboard a neutral station in unclaimed space, hoping that face-to-face diplomacy might achieve what a year of messages had failed to accomplish. He arrived with a team of advisors and translators, carrying data chips filled with proposed terms, reparations for Veridan, territory concessions, the complete dissolution of the Dralith military. Anything and everything that might satisfy the human thirst for justice. Vance arrived alone, walking into the conference room with the easy confidence of someone who had already won and was simply waiting for the enemy to realize it. Ambassador, she said, her voice neutral, I appreciate you taking the time. General, Vethrol replied, gesturing to the chair across from him. Please sit. I believe we have much to discuss. Vance remained standing, studying him with eyes that held neither anger nor hate, only cold calculation that somehow felt more frightening than fury. You misunderstand why I am here, she said finally. I did not come to negotiate. I came to explain. Vethrol felt his heart sink, but he pressed forward anyway. General, please. The Concordance is prepared to offer anything within reason. We can restore what was lost. We can ensure this never happens again. We can build a new relationship based on mutual respect and understanding. Vance almost laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Restore what was lost, she repeated slowly. Ambassador, do you know what you took from us? Do you truly understand? She pulled a data chip from her pocket and slid it across the table. That contains the names of every soul on Veridan 7. Every man and woman, every child and grandparent, every unborn baby detected in medical records before your ships arrived. Vethrol looked at the chip, but did not touch it. 1,200,043 people, Vance continued. Not numbers, not statistics. People with names and dreams and families who loved them. And your hegemony turned them to ash because we refused to kneel. I understand your anger, Vethrol began. But Vance cut him off. No, you do not. You cannot. Because your species has never experienced what we experienced. You have never felt the weight of 1,000,000 souls crying out for justice. She leaned forward, and her voice dropped to something that was almost a whisper. We were part of your concordance for 30 years. We were polite, we were restrained, we were civilized. And the moment we inconvenienced you, the moment we grew a little too fast or spread a little too far, you murdered over 1,000,000 innocents to send a message. Her eyes locked onto his message received. Ambassador, here is ours. There is no peace. There is no negotiation. There is only the answer. Vethrol tried again, desperation creeping into his voice. General, surely there must be some way, some path forward that does not lead to more death. We are prepared to give you anything you ask. Vance straightened and shook her head slowly. You still do not understand. This is not about what we want. This is about what must happen. You cannot buy forgiveness for Veridan. You cannot trade your way out of consequences. You can only watch as we balance the scales. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Tell your council that humanity is not coming to conquer. We are not coming to rule. We are coming to answer. And when the answer is complete, when the debt is paid, then and only then will we discuss the future. The door closed behind her, and Vethrol sat alone in the empty room, clutching the data chip with trembling hands, knowing that everything he had tried to save was already lost within a month. Human fleets darkened the skies above every world that had supported the Veridan strike, and the remaining Concordance members watched in terrified Silence as humanity demonstrated exactly what happened to those who mistook patience for weakness. The galaxy had believed that humans were soft because they chose peace, had believed that humans were weak because they followed rules, had believed that humans could be controlled because they smiled and traded and built colonies instead of weapons. Now the galaxy learned the truth. Humanity had been holding back. Humanity had been pretending. Humanity had been waiting, and now there was nothing left to wait for. After the slaughter, Earth sent one signal. Diplomacy is over. 1 year after the signal that changed everything. The war was over not because both sides had grown tired of fighting, not because diplomats had found common ground, but because one side simply no longer existed in any meaningful way. The Dralath hegemony had been dismantled piece by piece. Their warships reduced to debris, their shipyards turned to dust, their military academies burned and scattered, until nothing remained but a broken species struggling to remember what power had felt like. War Master Kethral stood in chains before a human tribunal, his scales dull with defeat, his eyes hollow with the weight of everything he had lost. And he listened as the charges were read aloud for the deliberate destruction of the human colony Veridan 7, for the murder of 1,200,043 civilian inhabitants, for crimes against humanity and crimes against peace. How do you answer? Kethral said nothing because there was nothing to say, because guilt and innocence no longer mattered in a galaxy that had watched him burn children to prove a point. 4 species that had supported the Veridan strike fared little better. Their governments dissolved under human oversight, their military forces dismantled, their leaders brought before the same tribunals that had judged the Dralath justice. It turned out, moved very quickly when backed by overwhelming force and absolute determination. General Helena Vance stood in the observation gallery above the tribunal chamber, watching the proceedings with an expression that held neither satisfaction nor joy, only the quiet relief of a terrible job finally completed. Is it enough? President Vasquez asked, standing beside her. It is what we promised, Vance replied. No more, no less. They killed over 1 million of our people, and we have answered. The scales are balanced. And now? Vance turned to look at her old friend, and for the first time in a year, something like hope flickered in her eyes. Now we build something better. The United Galactic Assembly convened for the first time on the anniversary of Veridan 7, a new organization born from the ashes of the Concordance, with new rules and new principles and new understanding of how the galaxy would work. Representatives from 93 species filled the vast chamber, some who had been part of the old order and some who had remained outside it, all of them drawn together by the shared trauma of watching one civilization nearly destroy another. General Vance addressed the assembly as the human representative, her voice carrying across the chamber with quiet authority. Let me be clear, she began. Humanity did not want this. We came to the stars with open hands. We sought trade and knowledge and friendship. We played by the rules we were given. We trusted that civilization meant something in this galaxy. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the assembly. You answered that trust with the ashes of 1,200,000 people. The chamber was silent. Not a sound except the soft hum of life support systems and the distant pulse of ships passing outside the station's windows. We are not conquerors, Vance continued. When this assembly establishes its charter, humanity will take no special position. We will return to being one voice among many. We ask for no tribute, no territory beyond what was stolen, no power that we did not earn through peaceful means. She looked at each delegation in turn, meeting eyes that flinched away and eyes that held steady. But understand this, the galaxy has seen what we are capable of when we stop being polite. That restraint, that patience, that willingness to believe in diplomacy, it can be taken away. The Valari ambassador, one of the species that had withdrawn from the concordance early, rose to speak. How can we trust that humanity will not become what the Dralith were? How can we know that you will not use your power to dominate rather than cooperate? It was a fair question, perhaps the only question that mattered. And Vance answered it without hesitation. You cannot know, she admitted. Just as we could not know that the concordance would allow one of its members to massacre our people without consequence. Trust is not given. It is earned, and we will spend the coming years earning yours. She smiled, and there was warmth in it despite everything. We are human, which means we are complicated, which means we contain both the capacity for terrible violence and the capacity for remarkable kindness. And we choose every day which part of ourselves to follow. For 30 years, we chose kindness, and the Dralith punished us for it. But we will not let their crime define who we become. We will rebuild. We will grow. We will reach out again with open hands. Because that is who we want to be. Her voice hardened just slightly, but we will never forget what happens when we let others believe we are weak. And neither should you. The Assembly voted to establish the new charter, and humanity took its place as one member among many. No more powerful in government than any other species. No more privileged in trade or territory or diplomatic standing, but every species in that chamber knew the truth that would never be written in any official document. Humanity had shown what it could do when pushed, had demonstrated that their patience was a choice rather than a limitation, had proven that their kindness was strength rather than weakness, and that knowledge hung over every interaction, every negotiation, every disagreement that would come in the years ahead. An unspoken warning that needed no words. Admiral Kowalski returned to Earth a hero, though he never felt like one, and he spent the rest of his career teaching at the academy, preparing the next generation for wars he hoped they would never have to fight. President Vasquez served 2 more terms before retiring to write her memoirs, a book that would become required reading for every diplomat in the galaxy. Ambassador Vethril disappeared from public life, spending his remaining years studying human culture in a desperate attempt to understand where he had gone so wrong. And on the world that had once been called Veridon 7, now renamed Memorial, a monument rose at the heart of where New Haven City had stood. Names of every person who had died were carved into walls of black stone that stretched toward the sky. 1,200,043 names that would stand for as long as the stars burned. And beside those walls, a single message was carved in letters large enough to be seen from orbit. A message that every ship passing through that system would read and remember. We remember. We answer. We do not forgive. But there was another message too, smaller and easier to miss, carved at the base of the monument where visitors would stand to read the names. They came with hope. They died with courage. They are not forgotten, and because of them, we will never let this happen again. General Vance visited the memorial once, standing alone before the wall where the name Sarah Chun was carved beside the name Mei Chun, a mother and daughter who had wanted nothing more than to watch a festival under alien stars. I'm sorry we could not save you, she whispered, but I promise you this. Your deaths meant something. They woke us up. They reminded us who we are, and because of you, humanity will never sleep again. She placed her hand against the cold stone, feeling the weight of 1,000,000 souls pressing back against her palm. The galaxy had learned its lesson. A lesson written in fire and paid for in blood. And the lesson was simple: humanity could be kind, could be patient, could be the best friend the galaxy had ever known. But if you hurt them, if you truly hurt them, they would become something else entirely, and that something did not stop until the debt was paid. The stars watched in silence as humanity stepped into its future. A future built on hope and shadowed by warning. A future that promised both light and darkness, depending on how the galaxy chose to treat them. And Somewhere out in the vast emptiness of space, the ashes of Verdun 7 drifted on solar winds, carrying memories of what had been lost and promises of what would never be lost again. Diplomacy had ended that day. 1 year ago, ended with fire and fury and a 3-word message that echoed through history. But something new had begun. Something forged in grief and tempered by justice. Something that would shape the galaxy for 10,000 years to come. Humanity had found its voice. And the universe would never forget the sound the end.